Hello everyone, this is Joshua Smith of Apollo's Artifacts. It is September of 2019. Here I'm going to take a quick review of 5 different articles about the Confucius Institutes, as I believe they pose a stark danger to America. The first thing to realize is that China has become extraordinarily expansionistic under the dictator Xi. He sees himself as a latter-day Mao. Through a series of behind-the-scenes moves, China has managed to wrest control of a significant percentage of the top 6 Hollywood studios. Thus, every single one of them is pumping out tons of pro-Chinese communist propaganda. The main vehicle for that is now also the Confucius Institutes, which is infiltrating K-12 schools and the universities. The first article here is from 2018, written by Marshall Solins for Inside Higher Ed. Confucius Institutes, Academic Malware, and Cold Warfare. Confucius Institutes and classrooms installed in colleges and K-12 schools the world around function as propaganda branches of the Chinese government. And it's filed here under opinion, but this is an absolute ironclad fact. It is not an opinion. There are presently upward of 100 Confucius Institutes embedded in American colleges and universities, and many more Confucius classrooms in American K-12 schools. Funded by the Chinese government, their activities commonly include courses in Chinese language and culture taught by personnel likewise supplied by the People's Republic. Before I go further, though, I also want to note here that every single component of the defense weapons industry in the United States has been infiltrated by Chinese communists. They are stealing information left and right. There is spying going on constantly, and they're sending all this information back to the mainland. Also, every single government place where these things are tested, like the White Sands Proving Grounds or Area 51 and so on, are all also equally infiltrated by the Chinese Communist government. There's somewhere around, I think the number is about 300,000 students here. Almost every single one of them probably should be rounded up and sent back to China as potential spies. There are so many, there's almost no way to sort through who is and who isn't. And we really need a much better defense capability to find out who is and the number of sensitive areas that they have contact with. Although Hanban, the Beijing headquarters of the Confucius Institutes, commonly advertises itself as a non-profit organization affiliated with the Ministry of Education, the instructional activities of which are devoted to promoting a harmonious multicultural world order, this is a benign disguise. Hanban is in fact controlled by high officials of the Chinese Party state, implementing the policies of the PRC propaganda apparatus. The governing council of Hanban, which annually sets its agenda, has long been headed by a member of the Politburo. A number of its ranking officials, beside their high status in such ministries as foreign affairs, finance, and national development, are members of so-called small leading groups of the party's propaganda and ideology sections. And this is something that Xi has really emphasized, is the increase in massive amounts of communist propaganda and ideology being shoved down the throats of every mainland Chinese. This is one of the reasons that the people in Hong Kong are so afraid of what is taking place right now, because with the extradition laws, they are going to literally be disappeared into mainland China, either for outright execution or to be thrown into concentration camps where they have, I think the number is close to 1 million Uyghurs held right now, but you do not hear the left here in the United States speaking out on their behalf at all. It continues here, which thus function as conduits for the realization of Politburo policies and the operations of Confucius Institutes. And insofar as Confucius Institutes and classrooms are installed in colleges and K-12 schools the world around, these educational institutions function as peripheral propaganda branches of the Chinese Party state. And they've come up against very little opposition here in the States because our universities are so full with political leftists, far leftists, woke leftists, all kinds of SJWs. Call them whatever you want to. Many of them are Marxists, neo-Marxists, communists, and socialists. So they're very friendly with this pro-Chinese communist propaganda. The objectives of the Confucius Institutes are as old as the imperial era, likewise notable for its policies of aligning foreign powers with the geopolitical interests of the Middle Kingdom by spreading the forms and virtues of Chinese culture. And this whole Middle Kingdom concept is because China always believes that it has what is called the mandate of heaven, and that it is sort of the umphalos of the world or the universe, meaning sort of the center of all existence. And Solons quotes the Minister of Propaganda here, where he's talking about the issues that I'm concerned about. He says, with regard to key issues that influence our sovereignty and safety, we should actively carry out propaganda battles against such issues as Tibet, Xinjiang, Taiwan, human rights, and the Falun Gong. And there are many, many, many rumors that Falun Gong members are being executed and then having their organs harvested. This has been a problem that's been going on for at least 20 years, maybe 25 years that I know of. Yes, they execute people and they steal their organs. And he goes on to reveal here that the entire curriculum of Chinese language or cultural courses is shipped from China itself, textbooks, videos, and all. And I'll jump down to the final two paragraphs here. In the incipient Cold War with China, however, the critical discourse has shifted from academic freedom to spying, having been taken over from the academics and universities by conservative politicians and state security agencies. Responding to pressure from Texas Congressman, Texas A&M University recently shut down its Confucius Institute. Just this month, 41 Minnesota legislators sent a letter to 2 Minnesota universities asking them to terminate their Confucius Institutes, a request all the more ominous insofar as these institutions are dependent on state funding. Also recently, the director of the FBI disclosed that the Bureau had been monitoring Confucius Institutes and in certain cases had taken investigative steps. Well, that's very good. They should. That's the least that they ought to do. In an ironic turn, the American government now mimics the totalitarian regime of the PRC by dictating what can and cannot be taught in our own educational institutions. The professors have no one to blame but themselves, as they failed to forestall the threat to free inquiry and free speech posed more than a decade ago by the establishment of Confucius Institutes in their midst. We are now in a pick your poison, lose-lose situation with the inevitable effect of compromising the academic integrity of the university, as if it really had any left anyway. I don't know where this guy's been. Either by keeping the Confucius Institutes or allowing the U.S. government to intervene in the curriculum. Well, no, the universities are all creatures of government. They get their money from the government, and I think that all of these Confucius Institutes should be shut down and all their members sent back home. That's the solution to the problem. Here's another article from Inside Higher Ed. Closing Confucius Institutes. The tide may be turning for the Chinese government-funded centers of Chinese language and cultural education as universities grapple with calls from Washington to close the institutes down. Over the past year, at least 10 have closed or announced plans to close. This is from January of 2019. This article talks about how academic freedom has been curtailed by the Chinese state censorship policies due to their sponsoring of these institutes. And as these centers are potentially centers for espionage, you find out one of the other main reasons that the universities continue to allow them to be there is because the universities are afraid of forfeiting, as they say, $300,000 annually in Chinese government funding. So it's all about the money. Money is almost always the bottom line, and why, say, conservative leadership over universities will allow all kinds of leftist things to take place within the university because they have to get their hands on the precious cash. Sort of reminds me of the wrestler Ted DiBiase, the $1 Million Man. Everybody's got a price. And then they even note here at the very bottom in the final paragraph that really there aren't even very many students who are taking these Chinese language or cultural courses to begin with. So really it is all just about the espionage factory and in order for the universities to get their hands on the money. Here I move on to one from Newsweek. Pentagon to end language funding for universities that host Chinese Communist Party-funded Confucius Institutes. This is a very good idea. If you're going to have the Chinese government funding one, why should the U.S. taxpayer also fund something doing the same thing? Citing national interest concerns, the Department of Defense will no longer fund Chinese language programs at universities that host Confucius Institutes, likely forcing a number of the controversial centers to close. This is a good idea and a good move because, like I said, so many of the universities only want that precious money anyway. And it talks here about how 13 different institutions had applied for waivers in this program, but all of them had been denied. One of them was Western Kentucky University, oddly enough, which is fairly close to where I live. My sister actually graduated from Western Kentucky, as did John Carpenter, the great director. That would be before he went to USC Film School. Most people don't know about his Western Kentucky background, though. He grew up in Bowling Green. And I'll jump down to the final paragraph here. It says, Senator Cruz, meaning Ted Cruz, believes that Confucius Institutes are one of many ways the Chinese Communist Party infiltrates American campuses, engages in academic espionage, and suppresses education about China. This is completely true, regardless of what you think about Ted Cruz or Republicans or right-wingers or whatever else. This is absolutely a fact. The U.S. government has no business subsidizing their propaganda, and in fact, it's in America's interest to counter Chinese propaganda and stop intellectual property theft in our schools and universities. Oh, it's not just intellectual property theft there. They're doing it in all of the big corporations as well. They steal all of that stuff and send it straight back to China. And next, I'll move on to an article from Politico. How China infiltrated U.S. classrooms. Even as they face criticism, Chinese government-run educational institutes have continued their forward march on college campuses across the United States. That's a reference to the Long March in Mao. And, of course, Xi sees himself as the new version of Mao. This one's from January 2018. It begins here. Last year, the University of North Carolina at Charlotte made an announcement to great fanfare. The university would soon open a branch at the Confucius Institute, the Chinese government-funded educational institutions that teach Chinese language, culture, and history. The Confucius Institute would help students to be better equipped to succeed in an increasingly globalized world, said Nancy Gutierrez, UNC Charlotte's Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and broaden the university's outreach and support for language instruction and cultural opportunities in the Charlotte community, according to a press release. Have you been to the Charlotte community area? Because I haven't. I don't see a big demand in that region for Chinese language, culture, and history learning at all. I see no way that it could be applied there. Skipping down a bit here, more than a decade after they were created, Confucius Institutes have sprouted up at more than 500 college campuses worldwide, with more than 100 of them in the United States. Skipping ahead a bit more, yet along with their growth have come consistent questions about whether the institutes belong on campuses that profess to promote free inquiry. Confucius Institutes teach a very particular Beijing-approved version of Chinese culture and history, one that ignores concerns over human rights, for example, and teaches that Taiwan and Tibet indisputably belong to mainland China. They do not. Take it from the aforementioned Li, who also said in 2009 that Confucius Institutes are an important part of China's overseas propaganda setup. Critics also charge that the centers have led to a climate of self-censorship on campuses that play host to them. You don't say. And here they really hit at the heart of the matter again. It's surprising that you would actually get this from Politico. It says, at a time when universities are as willing as ever to shield their charges from controversial viewpoints, some nonetheless welcome foreign communist propaganda if the price is right. See, it's all about the money. Moving down a bit further, but the institutes go to some length to obscure their political purposes. There's the name, for example. Most Americans associate Confucius with wisdom or cutesy aphorisms. It's likely the centers would be less successful were they called Mao Institutes. The institutes also offer a plethora of fun classes not for academic credit and often open to members of the general public in subjects like dumpling making and Tai Chi. And this is something that works on all kinds of people, just like Antifa calling themselves anti-fascist. You'll hear leftists say this a lot. They'll say, well, see, they're good because they're anti-fascist. It's right there in the name, Don Lemon told us. But we already know that the way things are named are sometimes complete lies. The left understood this perfectly with the Patriot Act. They said there's a lot of non-patriotic things going on here in the Patriot Act, and they would oppose that. But then with Antifa, they switch over and say, oh, look, the name says it all, and that's all you need to know. Well, obviously, there's more than just the name, as with these Confucius Institutes. They really should be called Mao Institutes, as that's the ideology they are spreading. The Chinese teachers are thoroughly vetted by Han Ban, according to Salin's report. They must have a strong sense of mission, glory, and responsibility, and be conscientious and meticulous in their work. They're also explicitly instructed to toe Beijing's line on controversial political questions. There can be no discussion whatsoever of human rights in China or the Tiananmen Square massacre. They continue here and report that only 2 universities have voluntarily thrown them out without being pressured. That was Penn State and the University of Chicago. And I skip on down to the ending. The Economist, meanwhile, estimates that China is spending some $10 billion a year to promote its image abroad through efforts like cultural festivals, foreign media, think of those China Daily inserts that are slipped into the Washington Post, and educational exchanges. Confucius Institutes are a vital part of this mission. It's not hard to envision how they might work, for example, by one day weakening Americans' loyalty to Taiwan. But their main vehicle, of course, is going to be through Hollywood, as I pointed out before, with their controlling interests in a huge amount of 6 of the major Hollywood studios. It seems that Beijing probed and found a weakness: money. And now on to the 5th and final article, also from Politico. Chinese-funded institutes on U.S. college campuses condemned in Senate report. Benjamin Wermund, this is 2019. A scathing Senate report released Wednesday says that without major changes, so-called Confucius Institutes paid for by the Chinese government and operating on dozens of American college campuses should shut down. I completely agree. A bipartisan report by Homeland Security Subcommittee blasts the language and cultural centers at more than 100 U.S. universities as too strictly controlled and a threat to academic freedom. And China's never going to give up that strict control. As you heard already, it comes directly from their political ministries. They are not going to give this up at all. It accuses many American colleges of failing to disclose how much money they receive from the Chinese government, which the report says has spent more than $158 million on schools in the U.S. since 2006. Many colleges didn't reveal they've accepted hundreds of thousands of dollars from China despite Education Department guidance that requires reporting of foreign gifts. China's also using all kinds of sub-companies that exist over there to buy huge tracts of land in America, which effectively that means they are owned by the Chinese government itself. No business operates in China without effectively having complete control by the Chinese government, controlling usually 51% interest or more depending on which company it is. And of course that means they have total control over the intellectual property rights of everything related to those companies. Points out something here that the other articles haven't mentioned so far, which is that this infiltration has made it into 500 elementary, middle, and high schools in the U.S. so far. That is an absolutely stunning revelation. Everyone should know about this. It's completely shocking. And this is all part of the dictator Xi's plan. And although he may look like Winnie the Pooh and absolutely hates to be compared to Winnie the Pooh, and he is indeed evil, he is not stupid. And it says here, on the other hand, the Chinese government, meanwhile, has stifled American efforts to establish American cultural centers on Chinese college campuses, which the State Department in 2010 started giving U.S. universities grants to set up. The Chinese government sought to control the centers that did successfully open, according to the report. And the final paragraph says here, partnering with foreign universities offers students unique international learning experiences and enhance research opportunities. U.S. schools, however, should never, under any circumstances, compromise academic freedom. U.S. schools operating in China should inform students about China's internet censorship and other relevant constraints. So I hope this helps you to understand the depth, size, and scope of the problem that we're facing with Chinese communism. It's not just the espionage, it's the infiltration all across America into the corporations, into the defense establishment and the universities, and quite apparently from this, the K through 12 educational system as well, which was already quite a mess. This will make it even worse. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Thank you.